Welcome to C Square Podcast, where we talk with everyday people about faith and work. My name is Micah, and this episode I am joined by Dean Abbott. Dean is a certified pastoral counselor and coach, a chaplain, theologian, author. Got a very diverse and interesting education background. Got an undergraduate degree in psychology, master's degree in theology, and a Ph.D. in communication. And he's worked for years as a teacher and counselor and as the author of 2 books about virtue and happiness. Welcome, and thanks for joining me.
Hey, thanks. That's a lot of stuff. Pack it in there.
It is, yeah. Well,
that's people, that might sound like achievement to people, but it's really an inability to focus.
That's funny. So, that's a very interesting, I think we could even jump into that. I've got an undergrad in theology myself, but I never went on to
one of those guys.
Yeah. And then ended up in the corporate world. So, take that for what you may. So I'm interested. We like to get to know our guests a little bit. Would you share a bit about your background, your faith background?
Well, I grew up in a sect. I grew up in the Church of God, Anderson, Church of God Reformation movement, which is distinct from the Church of God, Cleveland, Tennessee. Church of God, Cleveland, Tennessee tends to lean more charismatic and Pentecostal. The Church of God Reformation movement, Anderson, Indiana, is more kind of in the Moravian Wesleyan holiness tradition. And so I grew up there. In college, I discovered kind of Reformed thinking, Francis Schaeffer, all the L'Abri people, was very influenced by that whole tradition for a long time. Was a L'Abri student on multiple occasions. I went to Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary and earned my master's degree in theology. Currently I am a member of a Lutheran church, though my theological migration continues to develop and move in different directions. So that's my kind of formal theological background, if that's what you're asking about.
Yeah, interesting. Okay. I didn't know you were Lutheran. That's interesting.
Yes, well, there are many Lutherans who also wouldn't know that.
So you kind of had a different theological shifts at different times in your life.
For sure. I mean, I grew up in East Central Indiana especially even when I was growing up, there was much more kind of cultural Christianity, and growing up for me, Christianity was just suffused kind of in my culture, and I didn't like that because for me, growing up, Sunday school was essentially a time to talk about IU basketball. And, especially when are they going to play Purdue? And that was very typically the topic of Sunday school. And I didn't like that. And so simply just moving out of that environment and learning more about the, intellectual tradition of Christianity in general. I don't know how you could do that and not experience shifts.
So I noticed a couple tweets of yours, and then on your bio on Twitter, which is where I first, for everyone watching, this is where I first encountered Dean. You call yourself a Christian mystic, and you expanded on that a little bit. You said that
yesterday, yes.
Yeah, you said that it's kind of like some people take issue with that because maybe they have an idea of what that is, but you called it basically a label like a Calvinist or Wesleyan or something like that. Can you expand on what you mean by Christian mystic a little bit?
Well, two things really. Number one is that, first of all, I think what I said in that tweet was that I often hear people say, you shouldn't call yourself that. As if it's almost like they like I said in the tweet, they think I'm saying I am a saint. It's almost as if I put in my bio, extraordinarily holy person. Uh, but it's because they somehow think that to say that you are a mystic uh, is a way of complimenting yourself or something, and it's not. It's just there. Throughout Christian history, there's been a strain of Christian thought that has emphasized the the experience of the individual soul's experience with God, right? As opposed to emphasizing things like systematic theology, doctrine, dogma, etc., which is all good and fine in my opinion. But it seems to me that ultimately Christianity is fundamentally about the transformation of the soul, such that it can partake in the divine nature. And so Christianity itself, in my mind, ultimately is a an avenue for Christianity at its heart is mystical. Let me say it that way, right? And so to say that you're a mystic simply a way of saying that I'm a person who, in my theology and in my approach to Christianity, emphasizes the growth and development of the individual soul in its experience with God toward its fulfillment, as
Mhm.
opposed to being a person who emphasizes doctrinal beliefs. And I also put that in there because I know that the Reformed Theobros hate it.
Just a little quick trolling.
I may take it out now.
No, keep it in. Um, so, and I'll maybe related along the same sort of lines. In your, I think it's your Substack, one of your Substack about pages, you mentioned that you are a Christian who writes, not a Christian writer. Is that
Oh,
related?
oh well, I mean, when we say, I don't know about that. I mean, when I say Christian writer, what I mean is somebody who publishes a lot of those books you find at a Christian bookstore, if there are Christian bookstores anymore, right?
Yeah.
Whatever they are, 7 ways to lose weight, save your marriage, and get closer to God, or whatever they are. I'm just not. There's an entire Christian publishing industry that sort of focuses on mainstream evangelicals, particularly on mainstream evangelical women, and I'm just not. That's not who I am. That's not where I'm coming from. And so I use that phrase, Christian who writes versus Christian writer, to distinguish myself somewhat from that industry. And again, I'm not saying that there's no value in that industry or anything like that, but for me, it's not reflective of who I am or where I'm going or who I want to be or
Mhm.
what I do. I think that's
Gotcha.
clear if you've read anything I've written.
Yeah, I have two of your books, but I lent them, full disclosure, I haven't read them yet because I lent them to a friend.
Oh, well, has your
Um,
friend read them?
he has, yeah, and
Oh,
he just had a new baby because I asked him, hey, I'm
is it a result
interviewing.
of my books?
No, no, it's already in process.
Oh, I
Um,
see.
but so we were chatting, and because we've been having some of the similar discussions, at least similar to what your books are titled, like Christian virtue, cultivating virtue, manhood, how that plays out. So I had a lot of other stuff in my reading list, so I gave them to him to read.
Right.
Um,
I will say both of my books are, why in a lot of my writing, I just sort of background my theological and faith commitments. And I think in many of our discussions of virtue, that's easy to do because virtue, to a certain degree, is part of nature. And the pursuit of virtue and its effects on us simply built into the way reality works. And you can talk about it at length without invoking any particularly Christian, um, without invoking any particularly Christian concepts. Let's say it that way.
yeah, interesting. Um, yeah, so I am looking forward to he. I asked him for if he had any questions for you, and he's like, "Well," I was like, I know you have a newborn. It's fine." Like, so he because he's respectful, he wasn't writing notes in the books. He was
Oh,
taking
okay.
notes separately. So
Very good.
yeah, we once I've read them, I'll have you back on. We can discuss in detail.
Sure. That's fine. Sounds good.
So I first encountered you on Twitter, now known as X, which I don't find as compelling.
I
But
don't use that term.
so now henceforth shall be known as Twitter on this
Twitter,
podcast at
formerly and
least.
currently
Yeah.
known as Twitter.
Yeah. So what is your goal for using Twitter?
I have no idea.
I love it. It's
Um,
honest.
I started that Twitter account years and years ago, and I've just basically been talking on there for a long time. Um, it's really interesting. I don't have like a huge audience. I think as of this morning I have like 16,000 people following me or whatever. But it is amazing to me how people from all over the world have reached out to me to say something about my tweets. The reach of it is incredible to me,
Mm.
and so I suppose to the degree that I have a goal, it is to create some positive value for people who read. Um, I probably it probably would not hurt me to have some more systematic approach to growing on it or something like that, but more or less, I just have used it to try to publish thoughts that I think are of value to people, might make a change for them. And like I said, it's really been surprising to me the number of people who've said, reading your tweets has really changed the way I think about things. And so the feedback I've gotten over the years is that um, writing on Twitter is a very valuable thing to do for some people. So I just keep doing it.
Well, I think when I encountered you, my first thought was, "Oh, this is just common sense." Like a
Mm,
lot of your tweets, there's just normal wisdom and a lot of common sense stuff. You and I'm not sure of her real name. I know she doesn't use it on Twitter. Going Godward
mm,
just seemed it's not the most popular sort of vibe on Twitter because it's just common sense and maybe nuanced in the good sense. It's not really swinging hard into
right.
ideological camps or you know
Right. In fact,
picking. Yeah.
I like to swing hard against ideological camps. I'm opposed to ideological camps.
It might be a bit of a trope, but I think it's still true at certain levels. There's the online discourse can be really angry, right?
Huh?
Left and right,
Right.
theological, political, kind of all the varying camps and interests that people find themselves dealing with. You have the secular manosphere types like the Andrew Tates.
Oh, yes, I've heard of him.
Yeah, that guy. There's the Christian nationalists, which are a kind of an
Familiar,
undefined angry blob.
very
Um,
familiar
the,
with them.
the patriarchal theobros, which are
Very familiar with them
there's a
too.
Venn diagram, and then there's even some like that I've encountered ethno nationalists and
Uh,
others.
yes, I've steered clear of those people.
Yeah, I have a long block list now. To me, the kind of prevailing narrative in a lot of their maybe what I see as some of their motivations are like fear, anger, a lot of resentment, maybe not outright hatred, but it seems to be kind of bubbling there. Is that accurate, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would say a few things. There is, of course, the possibility, and in fact, it's been done for hundreds of years, of serious Christian political thought, for example. Okay. Um, and so, whether whether you want to endorse Christian nationalism or not, it is a possible intellectual project. And I don't know. I haven't read the big book, The Case for Christian Nationalism. I'm just not interested enough to do that. But as it appears online, it is just essentially spluttering, it seems to me, and trolling and play. It does not come across as any kind of seriousness. Now, that doesn't mean it's not serious as a movement, but as it presents itself on Twitter, I just don't see it. As you may have seen, I've paid much more attention to the sort of the patriarchalist kind of thinking because I'm more interested in interpersonal relationships than I am in politics at large. And so I've paid much more attention to the kinds of things that those who say they're Christian patriarchalists or whatever um, are saying. And I've taken issue with that, a lot of that, right? Um, and so I don't know if you saw, but Matt Walsh yesterday retweeted me and told 2 million people that I'm gay because I criticized his take on relationships. So that's the kind of level of discourse that you're dealing with these people. And this is what I mean by ideological camps, right? So as a generally conservative person, you would think that Matt Walsh would not regard me as an enemy, but he clearly, as of yesterday, clearly seemed to. And and I think that what we see online is almost a consistent shrinking of the camps. So that if you're going to be conservative, you must be this kind of conservative. You must see every issue this way. And so the problem with a lot of these guys is that they create more and more doctrinaire political camps, which eventually include nobody but themselves and their closest friends or whatever.
Hmm. Interesting. Yeah, getting more and more narrow, more and more exclusionary.
Right,
Hmm.
because you don't see the the nature of male female dynamics in exactly the same way.
Yeah, and
Right.
I've seen you critique both feminism and patriarchalism from, and so could you, so people who might get their hackles up by saying, oh, he's against patriarchy, he's against biblical roles or something like that.
Right.
Do you mind breaking down kind of both sides and where
Well,
they
no, I
go
mean,
wrong?
okay, well, first of all, there are two, we have to be more precise. Let's start it that way, right? So when we say feminism, we have to know what we're talking about. And when we say patriarchalism, we have to know what we're talking about.
Right.
And so, um, feminism typically, and I tried to write an article about this back when Andrew Tate was big time in the news. What we refer to simply as feminism is really just liberal feminism. Okay, so we have to, what is feminism? And I would simply define feminism as any kind of social thought that is preoccupied or that centers questions about the welfare of women and girls, right? And so any kind of social thought that that prioritizes the question of how can women and girls be safe and flourish? I would just call that feminism. Now, that is a definition that's somewhat out of sync with the mainstream definition, which everyone simply thinks of liberal feminism, but that's not necessarily true. And if you look on Twitter or other spaces online, you'll see differing new kinds of feminisms emerging. So if you look at Mary Harrington's a very obvious example of that with her reactionary feminism. I think the emergence of people like Louise Perry in her book, The Case Against the Sexual Revolution, even Helen Roy and the work she's doing on her podcast, what we're seeing there is an entirely new sort of feminism that takes a much more conservative tack, but still is focused on the question of what is good for women and girls. And so, um, with I'm perfectly happy to identify with thinkers who who are concerned with women and girls, but who are also placing those questions within a larger and more conservative understanding of social reality, more traditional understanding of social reality. The problem with Christian patriarchalists is not that they are patriarchs; it's that they are not fatherly. And so to be so many of them strike me as people who want to be patriarchs, but not in any way spiritual fathers. So I'll just, to name names, Eric Kahn is this, guy on Twitter. I don't know if you're familiar with him. Big time patriarchalist, and his engagement farming is, calling women hoes. There's a tweet he wrote about how girls go to college and become used up mattresses, et cetera, et cetera. And that's, to me, that is repulsive and vile. And it is not, it in no way implies a patriarchal stance. It only implies a stance of domination. And that what he's doing, and what many of the Christian patriarchs kind of guys do, is they emphasize domination of not just of literally everyone they think they can dominate, right? So it's not just women and girls; it's men who critique them. That's why when you critique Matt Walsh, she tells a bunch of people that you're gay, right? Because insults work better for domination than any kind of reasoned discussion. Although reasoned discussion, of course, is itself a more masculine activity than getting emotionally triggered and calling people names. So I'm opposed to domination without fatherliness. And so none of these guys give off any indication that what they want is to oversee the growth and flourishing of other people's souls, which is the essential task of the father. And so they can talk about how they're patriarchalists all day long, but they aren't, because they reject the spirit and the calling of fatherhood. Now, they may have children of their own, and who knows? I don't know them personally. It's possible they could be fine fathers, but in their public persona, they seem to me to not merely fail to represent the spirit of fatherliness, but to positively resent that kind of loving superintending of others' well-being.
Yeah, there, in some limited interactions I've had with some of them, because I don't really go out of my way to, stoke conflict online. Not all the time. Not all the time. Occasionally I'll stray into it, but I'm a small account, so no one really takes notice of me, which is fine. And also Twitter is not real life, so.
And people say that, but I don't think that's true. I think Twitter is actually real life.
So a reflection or an outgrowth of actual.
Twitter accounts are people, right? So you're there and you're interacting.
Allegedly.
What we're doing right now is real life. Like, yeah. I'm really sitting in my living room. I'm really talking to you. Mm-hmm. And so this is the same on Twitter. And people reveal who they are on Twitter. And, you can get a sense of a person's overall energy or being or whatever just by reading their tweets. So I'm slower to dismiss Twitter as not being real life.
Yeah, it seems like, that trope, or maybe, I don't know if trope's the right word, but it seems like social media can kind of focus maybe and amplify like the negative characteristics. Because like I'd say, right. Your Twitter account to me is just, to put it this way, fatherly wisdom, common sense takes. You're a counselor. You're interested in kind of people's relationships and how we interact with each other.
Mhm.
And you don't get the traction that when someone says, "Oh, you go to college, your girl's going to become a used up mattress or
Right,
whatever,
right,
whatever."
right. And so let me say something about that, right? The
Yeah.
one of the reasons that I'm so repulsed by that is that it is this person who puts himself forward, these or there are these guys who put themselves forward as Christian pastors who are, really taking on the world. But in fact, whose priority is to get themselves attention and establish a brand, et cetera, right? Th- I heard Douglas Wilson once. I think we all know, you probably know who Douglas Wilson is. He's the mentor for a lot of these guys. And I heard him say once that if you have a, a choice between saying something in a way that is less likely to give offense and or saying it in a way that is more likely to give offense, you should always say it in the way more likely to give offense. And that's what these guys are doing.
Hmm.
And and clearly, if they said it in a less offensive way, they would get less attention. And so I just think that sort of in what we call engagement farming or tweeting for attention, et cetera, to me seems a very much to have a this worldly focus,
Hmm.
right? What spiritual value are you focused on outside of getting a lot of attention, which which is a world which is a this worldly good. Now that doesn't necessarily mean that's it's not good, but it is a limited good
Yeah.
that's limited. Its value is limited to this world and to this particular social arrangement. And if you are a person who really is trying to put yourself forward as a trustworthy guide to spiritual values and to the sort of social arrangements of the coming world, you're when you behave like that, you're just ensconcing yourself more and more and more in worldly values that they don't seem to get that.
It's almost like they're unconsciously viewing or unconsciously being pragmatic and
Hmm.
maybe intending to be virtuous.
Yeah, I'm not sure if they intend to be virtuous or not, but they are fundamentally run by pragmatic concerns. I think that is true. And I
Yeah.
think
Hmm.
that is a and I think there is often a big conflict between what is pragmatic and what is virtuous
Yeah.
because of the nature of the social arrangement that characterizes the world.
Kind of my main one of my main problems with the Christian nationalist movement, because I'm a Christian, I'm conservative, and I don't want to get into necessarily politics, but there seemed to be a very pragmatic and kind of almost destructive desire. And I even saw someone say the quiet part out loud. They don't want the US to reform, they want it to be basically be destroyed. I don't think that's universal in the movement, but it was a very like, let's burn it all down type
Yeah.
of vibe. It was almost explicitly saying that.
Well,
Um,
regardless of what their political program is, my the point I return to is that many of these people really are so caught up in the culture war that they believe that their ends justify whatever means. And
hmm.
so their behavior online, for example, is often atrocious and they justify it because they're in a war and anyone, even people who are also conservative Christians, who in any way opposes or slows them down or critiques them is an enemy, and you can do whatever you want to your enemies because your end goal is so uh, noble. And I think that kind of ends justifying the means, that kind of instrumentalism, consequentialism, is inimical to real Christian ethics and to real Christian virtue. Right? That Christian
Yeah.
virtue says you live out your principle, you live out the moral reality, regardless of this, to a certain degree, regardless of the consequences, right?
Right.
And now there's more to say about that, and it's complicated, but that I think that is what those guys believe, that their
Yeah.
behavior is justified because their ends are noble.
Sure. Yeah, I get that. You tweeted out a quote from a guest you've had on your podcast, O.W. Root, who goes by Necktie Salvage on
Uh-huh.
Twitter. And I cut out the center of it, but the great slobification.
Hmm.
It encompasses an entire cultural ethos that is equal parts hurry, distraction, resentment, and worship of comfort and efficiency.
That's me.
That's you.
I said that, right.
Okay.
But um, Necktie Salvage he's the one that came up with the concept of the great slobification.
Gotcha. So for him, he's concerned with, or one of the things he's concerned with is your appearance, not in a superficial sense, but in like
Dress, the meaning of dress, right?
reflection of in like an inner reality. But I really wanted to focus on the hurry, distraction, resentment, and worship of comfort and efficiency.
Mm-hmm.
There might be more, but are those like the main cultural idols or cultural stumbling blocks that we have right now?
Well, I don't know if they're the main ones, but they're certainly big ones, right?
Yeah.
Um, yes, I think so. And I think I've written quite a few tweets sort of critiquing the notion of efficiency. Okay, so let me back up a little bit. Um, if you are asking me what my political program is, what my cultural program is, all of that, I would say that my political and cultural program, to the degree that it exists, is simply pro love, and that I oppose everything that is anti love or that makes love harder to achieve. And I mean, particularly love within a family and all that that means. And so I think in large part efficiency and living in a society that's maximized for efficiency in all aspects eliminates the kinds of conditions that encourage loving families, right? And so human beings in their natural state are not maximized for efficiency. And so we end up being forced into living artificial sorts of lives because we have to remake ourselves in a mold that fits more fully with the corporate expectations of the corporations that run our lives. And that when we do that, it just creates stress and creates obstacles for flourishing families.
This whole list kind of seems to be in contrast to, I think, what the main three transcendentals of truth, beauty, and goodness.
Oh yes, I would say that. So
I know there's been a lot of people probably who've done work on that. One of the ones that I'm more familiar with recently is Dr. Jordan Cooper, who's wrote a book on those three. So efficiency, the worship of comfort and efficiency, that seems to be, some people kind of rage against the suburbs. I kind of like the suburbs in a general sense. I live in a suburb.
yes,
But they are geared for comfort
and efficiency
and convenience and efficiency. So those three, comfort, efficiency, does hurry and distraction and resentment, do those stem from the pursuit of efficiency and comfort, or are those all like separate kind of symptoms of our
Well, they're
society?
all connected because they're all connected in the person, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that in order to be efficient, you must hurry. And no one develops virtue in a hurry, right? Because, and certainly no one lives a life of contemplation in a hurry. And we just live in a society that has forgotten that there are many valuable experiences and personality qualities and traits and spiritual practices that only happen in slowness. And we just part of living in a very materialistic society that has excluded from its primary cultural narrative every spiritual reality and value is that the primary narrative in a culture or society like that will believe that there is nothing of value that can come slowly or that comes in slowness.
Hmm.
And so there's no advantage to slowness. And I would also say connected to that is the idolization of competition. And this is part of where I don't conform ideologically to sort of what we think of as the free market Republican conservatism thing, right? Is that when we maximize for competition and we believe that only competition brings a certain level of value or creates a society that is innovative or whatever we think competition does, we we just lose everything on the other side. And the primary narrative of our culture tells us there is nothing on the other side to lose. But in reality, everyone feels that loss. And so we end up with lots of people who feel those losses, but have no language to express them. And that just creates confusion and despair in people.
So then, how do we best push back against the drive for efficiency and how that plays out in like hurry and pragmatism and all that sort of thing?
Well, there you just have to do it in the margins, right? I'm assuming that most people have to make a living, most people have to go to work, and
Yeah.
most workplaces are going to be oriented toward all of these values, and that the only way to bring to introduce those other principles or values into your life is to do so in the margins that aren't entirely controlled by your by the systems in which you participate, right? And
Mhm.
so you do it in your free time. And I think too is that, and this is again perhaps where I differ from something like the Christian nationalist vision, is that I'm very skeptical about the idea of large scale change, political change, large scale, um, even reformation, right? That I don't have a vision of somehow we're going to revolutionize the way the world is. Now, power shifts, but the emotional, psychological, and spiritual realities that govern what happens with people in power remain the same. Okay. And so when you ask how do we push back about it, I think you do it as weakly and as meagerly as you can, as you have to. And you don't and you there's very little that I think can be done on a large scale. And if there is anything to be done on a large scale, it just comes from people doing it on a small scale, right? Then if that grows, and I think there has been some of that. I think in the last 15 years, we've seen some of that happening, right? Lots of it happening around agriculture and food. although that movement seems to be less pronounced than it was, say, even a few years ago. Lots of kind of return to the land kind of stuff happening, and I think all of that's good. Um, but even that, I would not say has created a large scale change in the way we live culturally.
Right. I mean, it seems like people should do what they can with the resources and time that they have available to them. Not
Right.
everyone can go homestead and,
Right. But the important thing to say is that what you might need to do with the resources that you have available to you is nothing, right? Because doing nothing is the pinnacle of resisting the ethos of efficiency. So,
hmm,
so go take a lawn chair, go outside, sit down, do nothing, right? Now obviously you don't want to live a life that's imbalanced, but but I don't think we can overcome a cultural system that is focused on efficiency, competition, impersonalization, etc., by asking ourselves, militarism. I don't think we can overcome that kind of culture or that even that kind of story by adopting those same values in terms of our resistance to it.
I see.
Right? We can't think what is the most efficient way to overturn our cultural addiction to efficiency. Because if we do that,
Yeah,
we've already lost.
sure. One of the things that me and some of my friends do is we get together every Saturday night, usually every Saturday night, barring holidays or something like that, and spend a few hours chatting, talking, sitting in lawn chairs, usually around a fire pit, or maybe in a hot tub or in a pool, depending on the season. And then, we'll play games or we'll do
Mhm.
some other activity, just
Very.
as we connect as friends.
Mhm.
I'd say that. Would you say that that type of thing, that type of,
Do more of it.
yeah, do more of
Mhm.
it? I like that. It's good. So distraction, lots of online distractions. That's probably the
Right.
favorite whipping boy of um, some groups. How do we? And I know you're a counselor, so you probably have specific tailored advice to specific people in specific circumstances. Is there
Mhm.
anything general you'd encourage people to do with their our cultures? I mean, I've seen this. I graduated late 2010s or early 2010s from school, right before smartphones were completely ubiquitous. So when I moved to a new place for a job, I was using, MapQuest printed off directions still,
Sure. Right.
flip phone.
Mhm.
So, and I'm not that old, but I've seen kind of that cultural,
Mhm.
evolution there. And I read far less than I used to because that was our entertainment was reading. And now it's, social media, video, a lot of video content. Um, do you think you think reading less, more video consumption is a net negative?
Probably. Yeah, probably. Uh, it's- if anything, you lose the way that the immersion in language and in the written word shapes your mind. I think that's true, probably. That's certainly the Neil Postman kind of argument. I don't know if you're familiar with Neil Postman. He's a communication scholar. He wrote this very famous book called Amusing Ourselves to Death, I believe in the 80s. Still quite relevant, though, though it needs to be adapted some. But the principle is the same. And his point was that when we moved from a print society to an image society, it fundamentally changed the way we think. And so I think that's probably true. And so if you're asking me if reading less and watching more video is overall a bad thing, I think probably it is, insofar as it limits our ability to do the kinds of things cognitively that immersion in the printed word encouraged.
Hmm.
It limits our ability to think in particular ways, and in ways that are necessary for the for human flourishing, basically.
Hmm. Anecdotally, I can see a decline in myself, vocabulary and memory, and just looking kind of long term. It's nothing
Mhm.
severe, but yeah, I spend way more time on my phone in general than I used to, right?
Right.
Before video phones and iPhones and all those
I think
things.
we've gotten to a point where a lot of people fear a sense of disconnection,
Hmm.
and that we are used to constant, immediate connection with other people who are significant to us in some way. And so think about it. Like, it's interesting. Something happened to the internet in my house a few weeks ago. And before bed, I sat down and I watched a couple of episodes of the Andy Griffith Show that I happened to have on DVD. And the entire experience felt so different from streaming it online, because it had about it a sense of disconnection that even that I'm unused to, right? That I'm
Yeah.
here alone in this room, sitting on my couch, looking at this screen, and I'm also not on Twitter connecting with all these other people at the same time. And I think there is a profoundly different feeling that you get when you are doing something that is disconnected from the virtual relationships that everyone has, and that was, prior to the internet, very was taken for granted because it was the daily reality, and now is a kind of a strange and probably uncomfortable feeling for a lot of people.
Yeah. One thing streaming does is, I mean, that's efficiency.
Mm-hmm.
It's right there.
Right.
I have encouraged friends of mine. I'm like, all right, get the physical copy. If you want to watch a movie
Right.
and keep it, you have to buy it
Sure.
physically.
Yeah.
DVD now, or back in the day it was the VHS for me growing up.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, interesting. So to push back against the efficiency, the online, you already mentioned, get a launcher, go outside, spend some time thinking,
Mm-hmm.
enjoying the breeze, whatnot. That seems like I think the online version of that is go touch grass. I think
Mm-hmm. Right.
like go do something real.
Right.
Um, and I think that might be part of the homesteading movement and kind of that general movement, that vibe, if you will, that they want to do things with their hands. They want to do things that are
Right.
real. It's not going to be efficient. If
Mm-hmm.
you go big agriculture if you want efficiency.
Sure.
Um, you don't make a small regenerative homestead farm.
Right.
Yeah. Any other generalized advice for people who are looking to kind of disconnect a little bit from the rat race, if you will?
Ask yourself questions, right? That most people just aren't in that process, and so most people are unfamiliar even with what are truly their goals. Most people, I think, live a life in which they've simply introjected the goals given to them by our consumer society, and so they live out the steps to achieving goals that aren't even theirs. And so I think that the first step for everyone is ask yourself questions. Do I want this? What do I want? Where do I want to go? And 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 to kind of live a life of introspection, which is okay. Let's bring it to that as kind of a good place to wrap up. That the number one way to live a life of resistance to a society and to a culture, to an economic structure which seeks in every possible way to orient you toward the novel, to orient you toward the external, to orient you to the temporary, to the passing world, is to resist that by developing your inner life. And that means contemplation. That means reflecting on who you are, on your experience, what it means, asking yourself, what does this mean? And to claim for yourself the inner landscape of your being. And in doing that, cease to be quite so pliable and moldable by the culture outside of you that is in fact in many ways your enemy. And so I guess my ultimate answer to your question is develop your inner life. And there are lots of people who can help you do that if you have trouble.
Interesting. I like it. A couple questions as we wrap up. If you could have dinner with anyone living or dead, who would it be?
I think probably my high school English teacher, who was very important to me as a teenager and who died in 2019. And I think there are things I would like to say to him that I have not yet had the chance to say. Let's say it that way.
Hmm.
His name was Mr. Willis.
Cool. Normally everyone goes through. I usually have to give the caveat, you can't say Jesus.
Right. Well, I am of I am of the conviction that I am on my way to dinner with Jesus now.
Amen.
And so I don't need to say that.
I like it. Do you have a preferred Bible version you use?
No, English. Just so long as it's in a language I can read.
Yeah. I grew up fundamental Baptist, and they're very strict on the KJV. So that's what I grew up with.
I'm familiar with those people.
Yeah.
But I'm not one.
Yeah, there are some people who I'm no longer, but there are some people now who I feel like it's almost a bit of a, I don't know if it's horseshoe theory or if it's a pendulum, where they're moving back towards the King James just out of they're desiring that reverence and that tradition.
Right, sure, which is fine. I mean, it's just a reaction, right? It's like everything else we see now. But again, sort of insisting on a particular Bible translation is the kind of elevation of trivia to a level of dogma. I mean, you use the internet, you can go to BibleGateway.com or whatever it is, and you can see every translation. You can look up a verse and see it, how every English Bible version translates it. So just read them all, right? Yeah. And see to make some kind of commitment to that kind of trivial thing, to me, seems counterproductive.
What's on your current reading list right now?
Well, for months, I don't read as much as I would like to, or as I probably should. For months, I've been trying to read this book called Dakota by Kathleen Norris, a Christian writer. I listen to a lot of audiobooks, and I'm about 2/3 of the way through the first Harry Potter book. They're very popular with my daughters, and so I'm following up. And it's wonderful. It's great. It's great. I mean, I think that's perhaps that's obvious. I think I'm going next to listen my way through Sam Quinonas's book called Dreamland about the um, drug epidemic, particularly here in the Midwest.
Mm.
And I listen to lots of podcasts and that kind of thing as well, which I guess at this point, my favorite podcast is probably Pints with Aquinas, hosted by Matt Fradd. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Generally, yeah.
Yeah. So those lots of those kinds of things. I try to keep educating myself as much as I can.
Sure. Do you have a favorite medieval theologian?
I'm terrible at these kinds of questions that people ask me, well, who are your influences and what are your favorite books, et cetera, et cetera. I never can think of anything to say. I will just say, I think that I have been very much influenced by a Thomistic approach particularly to ethics and to an understanding of the human mind, human psyche, et cetera. And so I'm not saying I'm a full scale Thomist or anything like that, but I would say, particularly in the last 2 years, that that I've moved in that direction.
I just had a philosophy professor on, Dr. Nathan Greeley, who is a Thomist, essentially, for lack of a better term. And so this is like next on my reading list.
Oh, very good.
An intro to
Dr. Fazer's book.
Yep. Yeah, it was one of the recommended resources from Dr. Greeley, just to kind of entry level Aquinas for those of us who are not scholars. So
right, maybe I need that.
So, what are you working on? Any projects currently?
No. I do see people privately online for pastoral counseling, spiritual direction. I do that, and all that's available. You can find out about that on my Substack page or on my Twitter page. I'm not a licensed psychotherapist, but I do pastoral counseling, spiritual direction, coaching of different kinds. I got a lot of personal stuff going on, making changes and doing that kind of thing. That's something I work currently my day job. I'll just say that it puts me in a position to work with people who are in extreme situations and kind of on the margins of our economic and social system because they are either people with very serious substance use disorders or mental illness. And so that takes up a lot of my time and effort too. I think I'm leaning toward pursuing another book soon, and I'd like to develop my Substack. There are lots of things I'd like to do, but at this moment, managing the changes going on in my personal life take up a lot of my time. I do have, like I said, 2 daughters, et cetera. So
I have an 8-year-old and a 3-year-old, and I do this podcast in my spare time. Sure. So, yeah. So where if people are looking to engage more with your work, where are the best spots for them to find you?
Yeah, twitter.com/Dean Abbott or whatever. Just search Dean Abbott, and then it's deanabbott.substack.com. They can find me either of those places.
We will definitely link those below.
All right. Thank you very much.
As well. Yeah. Well, I really enjoyed this. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. It was great. Thank you very much.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. For everyone watching, I appreciate it. If you enjoyed this content, then feel free to like the video. Helps the channel a lot and the algorithm. You can also leave a comment, even if it's a dot. That'll help. And subscribe to the channel if you'd like to see more like this. So until next time, the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you his peace. And we'll see you later.